Hard Talk is in Egypt, and my next guest is Yosri Fouda, the television journalist who's taken his own show off air in a protest aimed at this country's military rulers. Are the forces of repression making a comeback? Yosri Fouda, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you so much, Steve, for having me.
I want to begin by taking you back to those extraordinary days of January and February this year, the revolution.
Yeah.
Did you feel liberated as a journalist as well as an Egyptian citizen?
Yes, on both levels, yes. I mean, those days were full of tremendous hope. And you lived it minute by minute, and you see your people who, for such a long time, everybody believed that Egyptians are servile and they wouldn't revolt and they just having it lying down and so on. And to see it for yourself and actually be part of it was a moment of pride, great pride.
And this idea that it was going to be a seminal sort of watershed moment for the media, I want to focus on what you decided to do after those days of revolution. You were very keen to establish, I think, a new form of journalism and base it on rigorous, challenging interviews, maybe not so dissimilar to what we do on Hard Talk. And you developed a program, The Final Word.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you really believe that the Egypt that had come from this revolution was an Egypt that was ready for no holds barred, rigorous, challenging questioning of the people at the very top, those in power?
I will give you one example. The first interview that I did with two generals from SCAF. SCAF is the military council, which is in charge of the country after the revolution. I had some preliminary sessions with them discussing what it was going to be all about, and they were very receptive. They were a little bit edgy when it came to certain points, because at the time there were some very negative stories as far as they are concerned, including virginity tests, claims of torture, and the rest of it.
And these weren't just claims. I mean, we now know these were true.
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately, yes. We have a lot of evidence now. I mean, as a journalist, yeah, I wasn't there to see it for myself, but it's just the evidence is compelling.
But
yes.
in a way, that's the point. You know, you were having preliminary discussions with generals, with men in uniform. You were trying to persuade them to open up to challenging, rigorous questioning. But at the very same time, you were living in a country which is still under a state of emergency,
yes,
where people who say the wrong thing can end up before a military court and can end up in a military prison.
Yes.
There was no way, was there, that you could do the job you wanted to do?
To a certain extent, that's true. But also, I believe that every single party in this country has been going through a learning process, including the army. And I realized this from the beginning. They are by nature very simple. The army by nature is very conservative. Now, they are in charge of a country which is exploding with hopes and wishes for the immediate future. What can they do? You try to understand their position. They try as much as they can to understand why is it that you are insistent to discuss this point or that during the interview. So I said to them, I'm going to ask about everything. And they said, what do you mean everything? I said, including virginity tests. And they looked at each other and said, I said, I know, either this is just one example, and you know, including other things as well, or I'm not. I don't think I can do the interview. Well, in the end, I'm going to ask the question, and you can say no comment, but in itself is an answer.
That was then, and we're going back a few months now, but in the more immediate past, and indeed only just a few hundred meters from here, we've had a truly terrible event. I mean, many people call it the Maspero massacre.
Yeah.
We saw more than 24 Coptic Christians killed, it seems, by the security forces. All of the video evidence and other evidence suggests that is the case. Now, as a result of that, there has been, it seems, a new crackdown on freedom of expression. How did that manifest itself for you?
It's been coming for a few months now. Basically, to cut a long story short, sometimes indirect pressure is much worse than direct pressure.
And what do you mean by indirect pressure?
You have two paradigms in terms of media ownership in Egypt. The directly state-controlled paradigm, and it's so easy for whoever happens to be in power to control it. And that paradigm, which started in Egypt a few years ago, privately owned media, some newspapers, some satellite channels. And I'm part of that. And we've been really struggling, whether under Mubarak or actually indeed now. The only difference between the Mubarak era and those few months after the revolution is that the Mubarak era got used to that, and they were a little bit more clever playing with the privately owned media. Now, I'm afraid you are going through the whole process over and over again with the military.
Here you sit representing on TV, as you say, owned by one of Egypt's richest men, doing your interview show. After the Nispiro incident, you want to put together a show which analyzes the army's reaction, involving one of the leading opponents of the military regime, the writer Ala Aswani. The plan is there for the program, and then at the last minute you pull it. The program never happens. Why?
There were some direct reasons, but also, to be honest, accumulation of so many things. I mean, that particular story started a day earlier when it was announced that two SCAF members, two military generals, were going to appear on another channel with two of my colleagues. So I called the head of the channel. I said, it's going to be a waste of time actually to go, because it goes almost at the same time, my show. Everybody will be watching. I would like to watch. So I announced on Twitter that we're going to repeat an old episode, because I would like everybody to have the chance to watch the generals. Tomorrow we'll have the analysis. And then I announced that Ala Aswani and Ibrahim Isa, who was actually one of the two colleagues interviewing the generals. The day after, which was the day where we were supposed to analyze that, you started to feel the heat coming through from different directions.
No, this is where it gets important. What do you mean by heat? Are journalists like you today in Egypt directly threatened?
They wouldn't do it directly. They would. This is what really gets me, and this is why actually I'm making this stance, because they would love to have the cake and eat it. They would love for you to exercise self-censorship and, get in line without even getting their hands dirty in the process. And I have an issue with that. If you don't like what I report, come out and say, I don't like what you report, I suspend you. And that's what I wanted to do.
But because it was maybe more subtle than that, a lot of people in this country don't understand why you eventually announced that you were no longer prepared to do your program.
Because, Steve, this is what I'm talking about in terms of the ownership. Businessmen who own channels now, their position is very fragile.
Well, let's be very honest about this. Your channel is owned by Naguib Sawiris, one of, if not the richest man in the whole of Egypt. Are you saying to me he was not prepared to back you taking on and confronting the military rulers of this country?
No one can do that. Everybody has a limit. This is a word of credit, actually, that Naguib Sawiris has always supported me, never intervened in my work, never told me what to do or what not to do. Always left it to my judgment to do it my way. This is why I volunteered until the very last minute. The head of the channel was actually begging me to go on air. I said to him, no, somebody has to draw the line somewhere. Because if they don't, I mean, for God's sake, they went into a channel with machine guns on that bloody Sunday. I'm not going to wait until they go into my studio when I'm live with machine guns.
You think it has got to that? You think there is now a situation in this country where the military is prepared, if necessary, to use direct force against an independent media?
I believe that is not a zero-sum game. This is why I am making my stance in the fashion that I'm making it. I don't want to destroy things.
Well,
this is not the moment.
But when you said, after you suspended the program and walked out of that studio, you said it is no secret that much of the pre-revolutionary mentality is imposed upon us today, and you said, if not worse now.
Yes.
So you're essentially saying the guys who rule this country today are worse than Mubarak.
In the sense that they don't have the experience that the Mubarak regime had. Both are bad, and I have to say it. When you don't believe in... if you're afraid of a camera, then you must have something to hide. It's as simple as this. This is number one. And if you don't believe in the freedom of the press, and you still try to convince me that you are backing a revolution, I would say to you, I'm sorry. The only difference is that they are not experienced. They are army people. They've never dealt with the civil issues before. They needed some reminding, number one. They needed someone to explain to them what this was all about.
You wanted to make a stand, and I dare say you didn't mind the fact that many of the revolutionary forces in this country saluted you for the stand you made. But what about your audience? There are people across this country who tuned into your show to see one journalist who was prepared to ask the tough questions, and you walked away and you betrayed your audience.
I'm not walking out, and I declared this on Twitter immediately after the statement. I'm not walking away from the square, from the field. I'm making a stand, and I'm coming back. I'm giving SCAF, the military, a chance to come up with some sort of a statement or whatever they, can. But
well, hang on.
They
already have. I mean, first of all, I spoke the other day to the information minister, Osama Hakel. He said, look, Yosri Fouda isn't telling the truth. The military regime does not want to manipulate and control the media. We do want to see the flowering of free expression. And after I heard that, I saw that a member of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces had actually called into the media and said, hang on, I acknowledge that Yosri Fouda is a skilled, efficient, professional media